Welcome back to ILTV News. We open today with the news that a 60-day ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah is increasingly imminent and expected to be declared today. U.S. President Biden and French President Macron will likely make the announcement within the coming hours. The Israeli Security Cabinet is also expected to meet, discuss, and approve the agreement this evening with the recommendation of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Now, joining me in studio to discuss the latest is ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
Yes, Emily, the Security Cabinet is meeting at this hour, and it's expected to pass. But it's hard to say that Israel will approve the deal with much enthusiasm. The talking points ahead of the decision lead with the anticipated Israeli retaliation for expected Hezbollah violations. The Security Cabinet is expected to meet, discuss, and approve the ceasefire agreement this evening with the recommendation of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Details of the full agreement have yet to be made public. From leaked reports, the general parameters include Hezbollah withdrawal beyond the Litani River, a withdrawal of IDF forces from South Lebanon, and the deployment of thousands of Lebanese army soldiers to ensure the terrorists cannot return. Israeli officials are stressing that Israel was accepting a cessation of hostilities and not an end to the war with Hezbollah. Israel's freedom to act on Hezbollah's violations of the ceasefire will reportedly be guaranteed in a letter between Washington and Jerusalem. This will include Hezbollah efforts to rearm once the ceasefire is in place.
המבחן של כל הסדר יהיה אחד, לא במילים, לא בניסוחים, אלא אחד בלבד, באכיפה. בשתי הנקודות העיקריות, אחת, למנוע מהחיזבאללה לרדת דרומה מהליטני, השנייה למנוע מהחיזבאללה לבנות מחדש את כוחו ולהתחמש מחדש בכל לבנון.
Officials have distributed talking points saying that Israel had no choice to either accept the ceasefire or face a potential UN Security Council resolution, with the U.S. not using its veto to block in the final weeks President Biden is in office. Meanwhile, the IDF is using the time before the expected ceasefire to attack multiple Hezbollah targets, mostly in the Dahia area in Beirut. Communications and intelligence assets were struck. Massive clouds of black smoke are covering the Lebanese capital. The expected ceasefire was negotiated under fire, and continuing attacks are expected until the moment the ceasefire goes into effect. Emily, the ceasefire is for 60 days. President Trump will be in office when it's over. With the ceasefire over, that's when Israel can renew the war to ensure that northern residents can return safely to their homes as promised by the government. And this added note, IDF ground forces did today, for the first time since the start of the war, reach the Litani River. And as we're speaking, just before heading down to the studio, I saw airstrikes on at least a dozen places in Beirut with black smoke covering the Lebanese capital. And Emily, one more thing to mention. A soldier, his name is Yonah Brief, was wounded on October 7th in the fighting on the Gaza border, and today he succumbed to his wounds. He was the last remaining wounded victim from October 7th in the emergency rooms. May his memory be of blessing.
All right, Steve, thank you for that. As mentioned, as the ceasefire nears, Israel is indeed bracing for Hezbollah rocket fire and UAV attacks in the hours or days before the incoming attacks come to a halt, hopefully. In the meantime, rocket and UAV attacks are ongoing. We have more from ILTV's Devo Klein.
It is widely anticipated that Hezbollah wants to show that despite heavy losses to its leadership, Radwan fighters, missiles, missile launchers, and UAV capabilities, they are still able to reach the pause in fighting while still firing at Israel. Some leaders of northern communities are expressing frustration ahead of the ceasefire agreement. They say that conditions have not been reached that will make it possible to return residents safely to their homes. Northern residents are on edge with what is being referred to as Hezbollah's farewell barrage. Overnight rocket fire targeted the hard-hit coastal city of Nahariya. After several hours of quiet in northern Israel, Hezbollah launched a barrage of rockets targeting the Nahariya area. A 70-year-old woman was seriously injured, and an 80-year-old man was lightly wounded by an impact. There was heavy damage to a building and cars.
בנוסף לזה, אני מפונה ממושב שומרה שהתפנינו פה לנהריה. ולצערנו הטילים רודפים אחרינו כל הזמן. המצב לא טוב ואי אפשר להמשיך ככה. אני לא יודע גם איך מגיעים להסדרה בצפון אם המצב הזה ממשיך.
The rocket fire began intensifying this afternoon. A female soldier was wounded in the Golan by a mortar shell. There was also a direct hit to a building in Kiryat Shmona with damages. As a precaution, schools in Nahariya, Akko, and many smaller towns will stay closed. IDF officials are reminding the public to follow instructions and revise defense measures. Frontline communities will transition from partial to limited activity status, limiting indoor gatherings to no more than 10 people and 100 people in inside meetings and work only, where there is immediate access to a shelter.
Well, with a ceasefire on the horizon, many Israelis are against the move and don't feel that Israel's security can be restored with such a deal. This is despite the fact that it is not a permanent ceasefire. Here to discuss the pros and cons is Brigadier General Amir Avivi, the chairman and founder of the IDSF. Brigadier General, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to start by getting your opinion on this ceasefire deal. Is this something that's good for Israel, or is Israel's hand being forced by the U.S. and other partners?
So I think that only time will tell. And I think really the issue is it going to be different from 2006, from the 1701 resolution? We saw that the international community in Lebanon were not able to impose on Hezbollah the resolution, and Hezbollah grew exponentially with 150,000 rockets and massive presence on the Israeli border with the Radwan forces endangering the whole north. This is a reality Israel cannot return to. And I think there is an understanding overall in the government, the army, that it's not an option to be in this place. We have managed to degrade Hezbollah dramatically, destroying most of their leadership capabilities, most of their leadership also on the tactical level. And now we need to make sure that they are dismantled in South Lebanon, and also that they cannot renew their capabilities north of the Litani in Lebanon overall. We need to be able to impose it. So if the agreement is really going to enable Israel to be proactive, if we see Hezbollah trying to build itself again, then it might be a good deal. But if we'll go back to what we saw in the past, this is going to be a big problem.
Now, we are getting information. It was reported that there will be a ceasefire at 10 p.m. today of some kind. Do you know anything about what guarantees are being spoken about in the ceasefire deal? I mean, you emphasized it would only be a good deal if Israel has the ability to enforce it. Would they? Is that what's being discussed right now?
Well, I think that this is the one point that Israel insisted on, and that Israel demanded from the U.S. that it will be clear that if the international community and the Lebanese army are not able to really push Hezbollah out of South Lebanon, are not able to make sure that Hezbollah cannot rebuild itself, if they don't do the job, Israel will do the job. And this is the most important thing for Israeli society and I think overall for the government, to make sure that we are able to impose the reality where Hezbollah cannot rebuild itself again. This is the most crucial thing.
Now, a huge part of the UN Resolution 1701, which you mentioned, as well as 1559, I mean, these are resolutions passed by the UN Security Council itself, and yet they still have not been able to disarm Hezbollah, which was a stated part of these resolutions. Is this even on the table? I mean, we're talking about pushing back Hezbollah to the other side of the Litani. Who's talking about disarming Hezbollah? This is a key component to having peace in the region. Is it even on the agenda?
So 1559 is about disarming all the militias in Lebanon, including Hezbollah. 1701 is an extension of 1559. It's not instead of that. And 1559 is still out there. I mean, the demand to dismantle the militias is there. Now, how do we get the Lebanese emboldened enough and motivated enough? And how do we get the international community engaged enough to really dismantle Hezbollah as a military terror entity? It's a challenge. It's not easy. And I think that this connects to another issue, which is Iran. I think that if there is one thing that Israel is counting on is being able to really convince the next administration that we need to hit the head of the snake. The head of the snake is Iran. It needs to be dealt militarily with an airstrike, a major airstrike or 2 or 3, whatever is needed to dismantle all these nuclear sites and military sites and really bring down the Shia axis. Attacking Iran can make a change also in Lebanon, in Iraq, in places where Iran is exercising its control. I think it should be a strategic goal of the US and Israel to take Iran out of Lebanon and other areas and really build an alliance, and a Western Israeli moderate Sunni alliance that will attract also countries like Lebanon or Iraq into this regional global alliance on the Sunni Western side and not on the Iranian side. So there is definitely a lot to gain by dealing with Iran, and this is part of the whole strategic picture. It's not just about Lebanon.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I want to thank you, Brigadier General, for joining us today and for shedding some light on this situation.
Thank you very much.
Following the horrifying news that Rabbi Tzvi Kogan was murdered in the UAE, he was laid to rest yesterday on the Mount of Olives. ILTV's Ariel Lalachiani has more.
28-year-old Rabbi Tzvi Kogan was laid to rest yesterday in East Jerusalem after he was murdered in the United Arab Emirates in what has been labelled an abhorrent anti-Semitic attack. An emotional farewell yesterday as hundreds gathered to bury 28-year-old Rabbi Tzvi Kogan. The UAE-based Chabad emissary was found murdered last week in what Israeli officials and many mourners have called an anti-Semitic attack. Kogan had lived in Dubai for several years, playing a key role in expanding Jewish life in the UAE, managing kosher food supplies and helping establish the country's first Jewish education center. Just days before his disappearance, he was filmed outside a kosher supermarket in Dubai. 3 Uzbek nationals are now in custody, according to Emirati authorities, who continue to investigate the motive. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the murder, calling it an abhorrent anti-Semitic terrorist attack. Zvi's father, Alexander Kogan, mourned his son's innocence, while Chief Rabbi David Yosef lamented the global impact of anti-Semitism. "They hate us around the world because we are Jewish," he told the grieving crowd. Rabbi Kogan's body was laid to rest on the Mount of Olives, leaving a profound impact on both the Jewish community in Israel and the UAE. Emirati officials also expressed outrage, reaffirming their commitment to coexistence and rejecting extremism. Tzvi Kogan's legacy lives on, not only through the Jewish community he served, but also through the babies already named in his honor. His death is a tragic reminder of the challenges Jewish communities face worldwide.
Well, countries and leaders around the world are reacting to the absurd ICC decision to issue arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, with a range of responses. But perhaps no world leader has been more vocal than the Supreme Leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, who once again is taking things a little too far. Let's take a look.
Prime Minister Netanyahu isn't only being threatened by the International Criminal Court. In the aftermath of the ICC's decision to issue arrest warrants, Supreme Leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, spoke with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Basij forces and stated that the arrest warrant was insufficient and that Netanyahu should be given the death penalty.
کاری که اینا کردن پیروزی نیست، جنایت جنگی است. حکم بازداشتشو صادر کردن، کافی نیست. حکم اعدام نتانیاهو.
The event itself also featured the regime's famous chants of death to America and death to Israel, and was attended by the head of the IRGC. In Khamenei's speech, he also accused Israel of bombing hospitals and homes, a sentiment he echoed on X, where he was called out on his hypocrisy. The Islamic regime's involvement in funding terror proxies has resulted in countless attacks on hospitals and civilian homes. The event was held while Khamenei and the entire regime face increasing pressure as they conduct execution sprees of jailed dissidents and protesters in Iran. In October alone, over 160 Iranians were executed by the regime, including German citizen and U.S. resident Jamshid Sharmad, who was kidnapped by the regime from his hotel in Dubai and executed last month. Today, many Iranians face the death penalty, including 6 boys from Ekbatan who were jailed for participation in protests. The Ekbatan boys are now facing imminent execution, prompting outrage from the public and from human rights groups. Despite this pressure, the Islamic regime has remained steadfast in its commitment to the destruction of Israel and support for terrorism, even at the expense of the safety and security of the entire nation of Iran.
Well, the Islamic regime in Iran is not the only body dedicated to Israel's destruction, even to their own peril. In the United Nations, there's no shortage of officials obsessed with condemning the state of Israel, so much so, in fact, that they even attack those who refuse to join in on the bullying campaign. The United Nations has fired Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, Alice Warimu Nderitu, over her refusal to call Israel's war against terror group Hamas a genocide. Nderitu had previously authored a paper in 2022 emphasizing the importance of UN officials sticking to the correct usage of the term genocide and cautioned against the frequent politicization of the term. On Israel, Nderitu stated unequivocally, as a legal matter, establishing a pattern of violence as a genocide requires demonstrating intent. Israel's campaign of self-defense doesn't qualify. While the UN has stated Nderitu's contract was set to expire, the UN body's response for such positions almost always renews the contracts. The refusal to do so is being viewed as a political move. Now, much of the anti-Semitism and polarization that we see around the world on political issues today is greatly impacted by social media. In this conflict, social media has been hijacked by many bad faith actors like the Islamic regime in Iran to advance hateful, false narratives about Israel. But some are working to fight back with positivity. Joining me in the studio now is Anthony Wolch of the See the Good campaign, which is working to lower the world's temperature through people, stories, and content. Anthony, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Can you start by telling us a little bit more about this campaign and what was your inspiration to do something like this?
Sure. About a year ago, someone picked up the phone and called me and said, you know, you've literally run the world's biggest brands, including Nike and Google and Coca-Cola. As a creative leader, surely you have to be able to come up with an idea to slow down hate. And so we conducted a global data study to figure out what is it about these targeted approaches to hate that simply don't work. Common sense will tell you why they don't work, but data science will converge in the same place. So See the Good was born out of that data study, and See the Good is a data-driven, celebrity-amplified global anti-hate campaign that is purpose-built and strategically built to unite people to combat the rising tide of hatred and division.
Now, social media, as I'm sure you know better than anyone, is a numbers game. Who is taking part in this campaign? Who is participating? And how do you plan to break through so that people actually see the good?
Well, to begin with, I mean, it's vital and it's really important that this campaign is amplified by people who have a huge voice and a huge platform. And namely, that happens to be influencers, celebrities, rock stars, and athletes. And so we have actors, Michael Douglas, and we have celebrities, including Emmanuel Shrieky, and we have, you know, American hero Daryl Davis. We have octogenarian singer from Uruguay, Ruben Rada. We have Danny Suzuki from Brazil. So it's people from around the world who are uniting specifically to lower the amount of hate that young people are facing today.
Now, I saw some of the stories that you guys have shared already, inspirational stories from marginalized communities around the world. Are there any particular stories you can highlight that you guys are emphasizing these powerful messages of positivity on social media?
Yeah, so we're tracking stories about people who have propelled humankind forward with such an order of magnitude that without them, likely one of us wouldn't be sitting here or alive today. And then they've distributed these innovations without the primary purpose of patent or profit, just to make the world a better place. And then they distributed these innovations without regard to race, language, creed, background, or religion.
Beautiful, beautiful. And how can others get involved in this campaign? How can they support it and help amplify some of this positivity that's so sorely lacking on the internet today?
It's a good question. This isn't everybody in. So throughout the last 12 months that I've been developing this pro bono, people have said to me, oh, thank you so much for doing this. And I said, I'm not looking for thanks, and this is not my campaign. This is our global platform. This is an everybody in. I challenge organizations, I challenge individuals, I challenge corporations to contact us. Look at seethegoodnow.com, get in touch with me, get in touch with us, because if we're not all gonna get behind this, it's gonna be very difficult to make a change.
Now, over the last year, of course, since October 7th, we've seen a great deal of hatred being inspired by social media, buying into false narratives, whether it's from individuals or even from governments in some cases. Was there a particular moment that stuck out to you where you realized, wow, this really needs to change? And do you think that this campaign has the power to really make a dent in the level of hatred that we're seeing on social media today?
So I live in Canada. And, you know, if you take a look at what journalism has done to the narrative over the last 12 months, it's pretty obvious. If you remove the fuel, you have no fire. Stop reporting on these ridiculous incidents. You have to change the narrative. In fact, you know, algorithmically speaking and mathematically speaking and statistically speaking, hate is like a grain of sand. Of 8 billion people, this grain of sand is proliferating these messages of vitriol that we're all exposed to today. But you know what? We are the beach. Why are we not washing over that grain of sand? Because nobody's doing anything about it. This has to be a united front. So while Nike has a platform called Just Do It, our global platform has to be See the Good. It's an everybody in.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate all the work that you're doing in a very hostile environment, perhaps the most hostile environment that we're dealing with on a regular basis today. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you kindly for having me in.
And today we have the privilege of hearing once again from Yael Eckstein, president of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. She shares with us a recap of some of the most important headlines from recent weeks. Let's take a look.
Shalom, my friends, from here in the Holy Land. I'm Yael Eckstein, and here are 3 things that you should know about Israel this week. Number 1, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad has released a video of one of the hostages. This is a terror organization who released another new sign of life video of Russian-Israeli hostage Alexander, who has remained in captivity since October 7th. His father was murdered, and his mother, grandmother, and partner were released in a hostage deal last year. It's been over 400 days that Alexander has been in captivity, held by this terror group, and we're doing everything we can to bring him home now. Number 2, President-elect Donald Trump has recently announced that the new U.S. ambassador to Israel will be Governor Mike Huckabee. Governor Huckabee has been a longtime friend of the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews. He's been a longtime friend of Israel, and we believe that this is only going to further and strengthen the ties between Israel and America. And number 3, in some fellowship news, earlier this week, staff from the Israel offices in Israel and Canada flew into our headquarters in Chicago for our Global Content Summit. It was incredible to see the coordination between all of the offices in brainstorming together how we can be better advocates for Israel, how we can produce content that's interesting to the world. I believe that through this intensive work, we will see an incredible outcome in producing more content that tells the story of Israel and of the historic prophetic bond between Jews and Christians around the world. Well, there you have it. There are 3 things that you now know about Israel this week. Join me right here, same place, same time next week for more updates directly from the Holy Land. Shalom.
Sagot Winery, where passion meets tradition. Nestled in the heart of Binyamin, our vineyards yield exquisite wines crafted with generations of expertise.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Rainy showers are expected tonight around most of the country, with lows of around 9 degrees Celsius or 49 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll see cloudy skies with highs of about 17 degrees Celsius or 62 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channel, subscribe to our newsletter, and explore our website, iltv.tv. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Emily Schrader. Be well, and thank you for watching.